I will not go through a long history of what Stalin did, his accomplishments and his demerits. Most of those things you can find in ordinary bourgeois books. I want to go over the things that you're not going to hear from anybody except a Stalin supporter like myself. Stalin was the leader of the Soviet Union from 1924 to 1953. Lenin died. He was the leader of the Russian Revolution. And he led the Russian Revolution in 1917 out of World War I. And he died in 1924, and Stalin became the leader of the party at that point. So he pretty much was leader of the Soviet Union from 1924 to 1953. And that's 29 years of time. That's a lot of things to talk about. I don't think the mic is dead. I don't think it's going.
Oh.
Or did you just turn it down?
If that helps, you can turn it on. It wasn't supposed to be on.
Okay, all right. So in 29 years, a lot of things happened, and I don't think in the hour that we're here, we're going to be able to go over all of them. So I'm here more to present you some of the provocative things that you need to look for when you study this question yourself or when you come across it. In 1 minute, I can tell you what Stalin's accomplishments were. He led the fastest industrialization in the world seen up to that point. He applied Lenin's thought to do this. He moved so fast that this was a factor in why Hitler attacked the Soviet Union. When he gave his last testament in 1945, Hitler said that he always had a nightmare night after night before 1941 that Stalin would move first, that Stalin would be improving the situation in the Soviet Union, and that he would actually attack Germany before Hitler got around to attacking him. And this is because the degree to which Hitler respected Stalin for what he was doing at the time, knowing that this was a worthwhile adversary. I'm going to pass around the statistics on that. You often don't hear about the comparative statistics on the industrialization in the Soviet Union. But, for instance, in the 1930s, the United States was in a depression. In fact, all the Western capitalist industrial countries were in a depression, and the economies were stagnating. So if you were a business person at that time, you can read this in business papers, the equivalent of the Wall Street Journal of that time. Even there, you would see that admissions that the Soviet Union was growing economically and was going to leave capitalism in the dust. So if you lived in the 1930s, that's what you thought. You thought, that things look like capitalism is going to be ground into the dust. It's in the midst of a huge crisis, double-digit unemployment, and Stalin's Soviet Union is growing and growing. And I'm going to pass around some figures on that, comparative figures that show the situation with the Soviet Union compared with that of the United States, Britain, Germany, and France, which are the other major industrial powers at the time. This graph here just kind of shows you the black bar is the Soviet industrial growth going up and up, and in the same years you can kind of see a stagnation of the major industrial capitalist countries. We're going to come back to that because establishing a developed industrial society that quickly was what got a lot of attention in the Third World, especially after World War II, when the Soviet Union became the number 1 or 2 superpower in the world. It was a very clear situation after World War II, after 1945, that the Soviet Union emerged under Stalin as one of the top 2 military powers in the world. Now that doesn't have any meaning to you unless you understand, of course, the history behind that as well. This is another why we call this an accomplishment. Russia was not always the number 2 or number 1 military power in the world. In fact, just in 1905, Japan beat it very soundly in a war on Russia's east coast. And in 1917, Russia was so pathetic. I mean, it was pretty much soldiers going into battle with pitchforks. They were being destroyed on the front with Germany. And if you, I'll show you a picture of this later, but if you know the map of Europe, there's Germany in the middle, France on the left side, or the west side, and Russia way over here. And so the Germans were pretty much cakewalking to this direction, and they won their battle with the Russians. took up tons of territory, and even under Lenin, they had to surrender all of the Ukraine to the Germans when they asked for it. And you may have heard in World War I that the real battle was in the trenches between Germany and France. Millions of people lost their lives in this really slow and methodical war in which people were dug down in trenches and they shot each other. That was the tough battle at the time. France and Germany going at each other with England backing up France. So Russia was nothing. The top military powers were Germany, England, France, United States. That's what it was when the Russian Revolution came about. But a mere 20 years later, mostly under Stalin's leadership, the situation was different, and the Soviet Union became a military power, and that's largely because of the industrial situation. Let me just read one quote from a book that came out just in 1998. It's called Stalingrad. It's about the most important battle of World War II. The importance of the industrialization under Stalin to the outcome of World War II. By the way, this book is by Anthony Beevor. During the summer, this was after Germany attacked in 1941, when Germany was producing approximately 500 tanks a month, General Halder had told Hitler that the Soviet Union was producing 1,200 a month. The Fuhrer had slammed the table and said it simply was not possible. Now, the Fuhrer, this is Hitler, the Nazi leader of Germany, was furious to hear that, wow, Stalin was outproducing me in tanks. And in fact, Beevor continues. He says, even this figure was far too low. In 1942, Soviet tank production was rising from 11,000 during the first 6 months to 13,600 during the second half of the year, an average of over 2,200 a month. So actually, at that point, under Stalin, from a situation of vast military inferiority, the Soviet Union went to producing more than 4 times as many tanks as Germany per month. And these were not low-quality tanks. The Germans had a hard time piercing the armor of these tanks. And in fact, they were superior to the German tanks in quality as well, at least in many important regards. So, and usually you can read any bourgeois history book and they'll tell you the industrial statistics of the time, the growth under Stalin, steel tons, the aluminum, the glass. And you can get lost in those kind of historical facts. So that's why I'm going to try to keep this brief. There's 2 more things I want to mention in his accomplishments to sum them up historically. This is covering, again, 30 years of time. He was the first to lead the collectivization of agriculture. This happened as the United States was having its own Dust Bowl depression, and the so-called NEP in the Soviet Union was running out of steam. Agricultural production was decreasing instead of making more grain available to the cities and feeding more people. And Stalin came in and, no doubt with brutal force, collectivized agriculture. And that meant that people who had previously sold things on the free market, sold their grain, their foodstuffs, now were in collective farms, trying to put their livestock together and having their produce taken to the cities, more or less by force, but with the cooperation of the lower and middle peasants, who, contrary to what you hear a lot these days, a lot of them really did hate the rich peasants, the landlords, not to mention the landlords who had been expropriated under Lenin, but who hated the so-called kulaks. So that's the first time that had happened in history, and it laid the basis for the industrialization that I had just already discussed.